All right, so in your mind, what is oral tradition?
Well, oral tradition is basically the verbal expression of whatever you really are trying to express. And you asked me about tradition, and so for me that would mean what are the stories, what are the legends, what are the ceremonies, what are the things that continue to allow the Haudenosaunee people to maintain their history, their culture, if you will, their language. So for me, oral tradition is a huge part of who we are, who we want to be, and who we will be in the future.
Okay, so in your mind, the idea of oral tradition is very integral for the Haudenosaunee, and how were you taught oral tradition?
Well, oral traditions to me basically came through what we basically just mentioned, and that was through the ceremonies. Ceremonies are very oral, and those ceremonies are really ancient in terms of the dates that they've been in existence, and they continue to be. So really the oral part of the Haudenosaunee's life, if you will, is a critical element in the development of their communities, of the people in their communities, of their clans, and so forth. So the oral tradition is really probably the single most important part of the actual nation itself. Once you lose your language, the oral part, you probably are on the backside of the mountain on a downslide.
So how do you think oral tradition has changed with relationship to the younger generations as through the services and ceremonies and customs that you go through year after year? Do you see a change as time has progressed in the younger generation and compared to when you were a child and today's youth?
There's no question about that, absolutely. Okay. What goes around comes around, however. And so in the 60s, if you will, when this country changed, the Native kids changed as well. There was less of an interest in the oral tradition, less of an interest in the ceremonies, less of an interest in the traditions. However, as I said, what goes around comes around. Today, you'll see a really significant resurgence in the oral traditions. The language, if you will, is now being taught at a very, very early stage. Certainly in Iroquois territory, that's for sure. That is going on. So there's a resurgence in the interest in the culture and the traditions of who we are. And obviously that's a really, really good thing. So that the stories, if you will, and the methodology of teaching really, I think, is enjoying a rebirth and a re-interest in who those kids are and what they're, in a very historical and meaningful way, not only who they are, but who they represent.
Okay.
And it's a very, very, very ancient story.
Do you see, when you visit Iroquois territory and settlements today, do you see younger children that you can see in the future as leaders? Do you see that Iroquois belief within them?
Well, there are, just like in any culture, okay, there are folks who are content to be who they are in a certain sense and not necessarily tradition-oriented, if you will, okay? They don't have dinner at 5 o'clock every day, okay? But then there are a significant group of people who believe that the traditions are critical to the survival of their culture and their community. And so the answer to your question is just like in any culture, there are a limited number of people who have the leadership capabilities and who have the interest in becoming leaders of the tradition, if you will, of the culture. Having said that, in Iroquois country, the clan mothers are very, very, one of their key responsibilities is to educate the young people into the traditions of the culture. And in doing so, they're able to identify who these younger individuals are who look like they potentially could possibly be leaders in the community. Having said that, interestingly enough, just as you yourself took a trip to Onondaga, we also took a group of environmental students there. I want to say maybe 6 or 7 or 8 years ago now, because we were interested in developing a site here at the university, a quiet place where students could go and reflect. And we wanted to find out what the young people in the reservation community would think about that. In other words, what would their thoughts be about a reflection site like this? And in the process of doing that, we had a classroom full of students. We also had 15 Bucknell students in front of the classroom, which was probably a very intimidating thing for the young kids that were in the seats. And so when we were asking them questions, it was very difficult for any of them to raise their hand because they were just intimidated, if you will, by our students. However, there were 2 people who really would raise their hand with almost every question that was asked and would want to express themselves. And so you're going to find those kind of kids in every classroom, okay, in every culture, who have that interest and confidence, if you will, in who they are and what they are, and be able to raise their hand and ask a question like that or answer a question like that. So, having said that, I'll tell you a story.
All right.
One of the questions was, okay, from one of the young students to our students, and the question was, the teacher is going to send you out into the field to look for a certain plant, and the first one back, in a certain sense, will win a prize and be graded. So the class disperse and they're out in the field and they're looking for this specific plant, and this student comes upon this plant and immediately picks it and hustles back and runs back to the classroom and presents his find to the instructor, and the teacher says, well, good, you found the plant. But you get a failing grade. So why would the kid who came back first with the plant, why would he also get a failing grade?
He didn't think about what plant he was trying to get?
He didn't think about, maybe it's the last one in existence, and if I pick it, there will never be another one. Now this is a young kid asking our students that question.
That's pretty cool.
And our students are obviously, standing there with this look on their face like, oh, we just got had. You know, so so they know.
Yeah.
They're getting it.
Yeah.
These are young kids.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, you would never, I guess, having them visit your school, you feel like you're comfortable in your own environment, and they come and bring up these points, and you're
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They come from a different perspective.
Yeah.
Okay, the plants, the animals, the trees, the insects, the fishes, and everything, whether it's a rock in in a stream. Everything has a place, everything has a meaning, everything has a purpose, and everything has a life. And when you understand that, then you don't run down the sidewalk stepping on ants because they're ants.
Yeah.
Okay, you don't, start cutting down trees because, there are too many leaves on them, you don't want to rake it.
Yeah.
Okay, I mean, it's just, they come from a different place, it's a different way. I think, I don't know if you were listening to Orrin Lyons when he was here on campus, maybe a year and a half or 2 years ago now, talking about value change for survival.
Okay.
Okay, and that's exactly what it is. It's a value issue. What do you value? And what is the meaning of the purpose of the value that you have for yourself relative to the environment? And obviously, when you look at what's going on now with climate change, that's nothing but a value. That's a value process, if you will, about how people feel about what they do every day, and how that relates to the environment. And obviously, unless we have some kind of a value change about how we feel about the environment, this place is in for a tough time.
Yeah.
And so your children and the children of those and the children of those, it's going to be a different place.
Yeah. And just one last question about the difference between oral tradition and storytelling. Do you see any difference between those two, or do you think that they are together one?
No, they're to me they're one. Although they can certainly be separate in a certain sense. Okay, but in reality they're very, very connected. Okay, and the reason I say they could be different is in the lower grades in a community school, just native community school, oftentimes these stories are acted out, and so while the story is oral in terms of the students participating in the oral part of it, they're also acting it out physically. So it's not just an oral thing, but it's a more physical expression of the story itself. And the kids will learn very, very quickly because they're participating in the story itself. And it's great when you see something like that happen with the young kids.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Watching them grow up. Well, thank you very much.
More than welcome. Thank you.